Hey guys, today we're going to make a Meshuggah inspired track and it's going to sound like this. Alright, grab your calculators guys, because this one's going to get technical and we'll talk about plugins and tones and all of that stuff later on. But first, I just want to focus on how these guys write riffs, how they write songs, because Meshuggah is one of those bands that I think most of us remember when we first heard them and just being blown away and trying to find the beat, trying to make sense of what you're hearing. And then later having that realization that it's all 4/4 and it's all like quite easy to follow if you listen to it in the right way. So today I want to dive into how these guys craft these polyrhythmic, polymetric songs that are technically in 4/4 but break all the rules of 4/4. So of course, with a band that is as rhythmically focused as Meshuggah is, I want to start by focusing on the drums, and we're in 4/4 time, so 4 beats per bar. And I want to start this really simple. Let's just throw a snare on the 3 like you usually would and some open hats. Now from here, I feel like the quickest way to explain Meshuggah is first of all explaining what most bands would do. So most bands would see it as, here is my bar, my 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's maybe do this. Let's do that. And then we'll repeat that kick pattern because the bar repeats, and then we'll have a nice drum beat. So this is like a generic drum beat. You know, there's a little syncopation in there, it grooves, and every bar, it repeats. Nice and predictable. So what Meshuggah does here, instead of starting with this very simple 4/4 pattern and then working the kicks around that so it all grooves in 4/4, is they basically go against everything they've done. So they've implied 4/4 here, or we've implied 4/4 here. And how Meshuggah does that is basically by, instead of going here's our bar and here's where we have to repeat, they go, okay, well, what if we go for like 4 bars or 8 bars? And within these confines, as long as this whole thing repeats, we can do whatever we want with the kicks here. So let's now treat this as a 4-bar riff that doesn't have to repeat until it gets to the end of the 4 bars. Stay with me here, this is going to make sense. So with the kicks, we basically want to imply a new time signature. Let me do this over here so that you can hear the kick without the snare and everything. So here is where we want to ignore the 4/4 and maybe say here is where we want it to repeat rather than here at the end of the bar. So let's go for a 5/4 loop instead. Let's try like, okay, if we repeat that on the 5th, 8th note. Okay, so what we have here now is a pattern that's in 5. This repeats every 5th count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So on its own, this kick pattern is clearly grouped into 5s, but if we bring this back over here, so it's going against our 4/4 drums, now we get a polymeter. We get 4/4 on the hi-hat and snare, and we keep this 5 rhythm going on the kicks. Let's keep everything going, because remember, we want this to all repeat right at the end of the measure. So instead of every bar, this is only going to loop around and repeat itself after 4 bars. And this is why they call it math metal. So like I said, we have this in 5 on the kick, times 5 by 3, you get 15. So I'm just adding 1 count at the end, because we have 4 bars of 4/4 here. That's 16 counts. So we're making it line up so that this is 4/4, but it's got 5/4 within it. This is what Meshuggah does all the time. Like basically make things go completely out of time, but then add up the difference and do the math at the end of the bar so that everything comes back together. And it's technically 4/4, but just pushing the limits and breaking the rules of 4/4. So even though we have a complex polymeter set up here now, do you hear how it's actually still very simple and easy to follow if you just listen to the hi-hat and the snare? You almost have to listen to hear the 5 in there, but that's where the guitar's going to come in, because we're going to use the guitar riff to accent the 5/4 rhythm and go against the 4/4 even more. So we'll break down the tones and stuff in a minute, but first, let's just get this rhythm down. So we want to follow exactly what the kicks are doing. So just using open strings, that's going to be like this. All right, so let's lay down a riff following that pattern. I want to keep it nice and simple. Some bends on the 1, some slides down from the octave. Let's do it. You hear how we're looping that background to 4/4 at the end, so it's like repeating 5, repeating 5, repeating 5, and then we just use one extra count right at the end here to make up the difference. Let's get it on the right and listen for that now. All right, we have bass and other stuff to track, but to quickly break down some of these sounds. So for the drums, I'm using Modern and Massive 2, and I'm using the first drum here for everything, like for the kick, for the snare, for the hats, the cymbals. I'm just using the first one for everything, and then I have my own processing on it, but to be honest, it's a load of stuff you've seen me probably do in past videos, just, you know, general stuff you would do to get a heavy modern metal drum sound. So I don't want to waste time getting into that today. However, if you do want a super deep dive on metal drum sounds and everything else to do with modern metal, you may want to check out my 8.5-hour Modern Metal Pro course. I'll put the link in the description. Check it out if you're interested. And coming to the guitar tones here. Man, I should not be allowed around these types of tones. Like, I can waste days just jamming through a Meshuggah tone. Okay, anyway, so coming to the tones, on the left, I have the Mixwave Spirit Box amp, which is just a great, solid modern metal amp. However, the secret ingredient here is in front of it, I've got this Audio Assault pedal. Like, honestly, thank God for this pedal. This is an emulation of the signature Meshuggah 33 pedal, the Boost. This is a $5 plugin. This video isn't sponsored or anything, but this is just an insane plugin. Listen to how much this turns this into a Meshuggah tone. It just tightens up the low end. It gives it that mid-range grind, and it just turns it from like a bassy, super low, slightly out of control note into just this super powerful Meshuggah tone. Like, remember, we're low here. I'm in F standard tuning. It is hard to make that low F not just sound like a bass note. Like, we still want this guitar to be a mid-range instrument. It just wants to sound super low. And that pedal just tightens up the low end and gives it all of that harmonic richness in the mid-range that we need to make this sound huge and not just like a bass note. So that's on the left. Then for the right, I went for a slightly different approach, just so we have slightly different sounds in the left and right channel. And for this, I'm using the Audio Assault Meshuggah pedal again. And then within the Audio Assault plugin, I'm using this amp, Game Meshu, which is like an anagram of Meshuggah. So this is an emulation of the 14 Meshuggah amp, and it sounds insane to me. And I have an EQ after each of these tones. For that one, we just have some low mids that I'm boosting, a little bit of shaping in the high mid-range. And for the Spirit Box one, we have basically just some mid-range cleanup. It's a very mid-rangey amp, the Spirit Box one. So together, that's our guitar tone. All right, let's add some bass and then some guitar effects to this as well. Two more very important parts of the Meshuggah sound, especially the bass. And the bass in Meshuggah, I think, is something that a lot of people overlook because the guitar and bass are tuned in the same octave for this band rather than, you know, the bass an octave lower like you would usually have it. So I think, you know, because the guitars are so low, it makes some people think the bass is kind of redundant because it's just doing the same thing. But as far as, you know, from a mix perspective, the guitar and bass are still doing a totally different job here. Like, the guitar is all about that sharp top end and the mid-range harmonic distortion we were just talking about, whereas the bass is still, you know, it's going to be all about that low end punch. And also the mid-range in the bass is important. There's like a mid-range grind that you get in Meshuggah tones, specifically the bass tone, that pairs with the guitars, and that really it isn't Meshuggah until it has that bass grind in there as well. So I have this tone I've put together, and that grinding distortion is going to give our guitars exactly what they need. Let's do it. We only needed one take, but I just couldn't stop then. That sounds too good. I love how polymeters have this effect where it's just a quick repeated pattern, but because of the 5/4, you get different notes accented every time it repeats, so it just like grooves so hard. Let's actually just quickly take that a little further. This is something Meshuggah does, like, let's just throw some snares in there to accent some slightly different notes. It'll still be 4/4, but we can make it even more ambiguous. Yeah, let's try that. Love it. Like, it's getting technical now, but if you follow those hi-hats, still 4/4. Okay, so coming back to this bass tone, I'm using the JST Hellraiser, my favorite amp for modern metal, and in front of that, I have Dark Glass Ultra, my favorite distortion for modern metal. Nasty, you know, this is all about that high mid-range grind, this plugin, so that's what we need. And then I just have an EQ after the amp, giving us some more fullness in the low end, shaping the mid-range and just losing the top end that we don't need. All right, and let's throw an intro in front of this. And like I keep saying, Meshuggah's usually 4/4, but they like to throw the listener off for sure. So what I think we should do is kind of imply 5/4 in the intro so that when it drops and it's actually 4/4 with a 5/4 polymeter, I think that's going to be insane. So all I have here on this track for the intro is the same thing again, but you can see I've got the drive a bit lower on the pedal and I've got it pretty low on the amp, less treble, so it's less in your face, less presence. So this is kind of a typical Meshuggah intro tone. Honestly, again, not sponsored by this company, but well done Audio Assault for making a great emulation of the pedal, the amp, and then I'm just using the stock cab here. Like, sounds just like Meshuggah. So yeah, let's tease our riff here, but we'll imply 5/4 by not adding that extra count on the end. Bro, that hits so hard. And if this was a Meshuggah track, I feel like they would add some of those kind of ominous lead tones that they're known for. So I have this tone, just using the Neural 14 Cali Clean amp, pretty standard sound, but let's throw a delay after this. I'll use the Cubase stereo delay, just go for like a pretty standard setting. Yeah, and let's throw some reverb. I'll just use Aura because it's my go-to. Go for about 1.5 seconds and then, yeah. But the real key for those ominous clean Meshuggah tones is some kind of detuning. We could use a chorus, but I'm just going to use the 3 kHz pitch shifter and just detune it a couple of cents and bring down the mix so that we mostly hear the main signal, but then we should get this unsettled. There we go, chorus kind of sound. All right, let's add that into the mix for a bit more atmosphere. Man, that's difficult. I was literally having to count the beats to make sure that I was actually in time there. But we got it. So all I want to do now is lay down one more tone because that's one of their like cleaner tones. Now I want to add one of the more aggressive lead tones we hear. So I just have the same thing again, the pitch shifter into a stereo delay and Aura. And all I'm doing differently is using the Meshuggah amp again this time with a bit more high gain. So it's more of that high gain Meshuggah lead sound. So I just want to switch things up halfway through, get a more intense vibe, maybe go for some higher notes. And I'm pretty much just going for like a slightly atonal kind of diminished vibe with the notes. Like Meshuggah obviously is not a very melodic band, but they do have some melody in their music. And it's usually in this stuff, in like the guitar leads. You know, usually it's more there for the atmosphere than the catchy melodies or whatever, but we want some kind of like ominous diminished melody in there. Yeah, those 4 notes, let's do it. All right, guys, and with that, I think we have an awesome little Meshuggah track here. I'm glad I finally found time to make a video about this band because Meshuggah, we've got to pay our respects to them. They are to modern metal what the Beatles is to pop, what Sabbath is to metal. You know, everything we hear in modern metal today, all these bands, you know, we all rip off Meshuggah. If someone gets that reference, let me know below. But seriously, like, these guys are still ahead of the game. What they were doing 20 years ago is ahead of what everyone's doing now. So this was a fun one to do. If you enjoyed it too, please hit the like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And remember, if you want to get the ultimate deep dive from from me on all of this stuff, you can check out the course in the description. All right, let's listen through what we just made. Thank you guys so much for watching if you made it this far. Here it is.